Good evening, everybody. It is Saturday night, and it's the Bible Hour. Petit Bois in the house already. Good evening, all. Thanks for the timeline of Kings posted on YouTube. You mean Facebook, Petit Bois? I had thought when we were reading through it that I should do a timeline, but then, hey, presto, it was on YouTube. You mean Facebook? Amazing. Yep, helpful stuff that on Facebook and the Twitter. Good evening, Park End Church admin. Who is it? Who is the admin tonight? That's what we all want to know. That's why we arrive here. Neil. How am I sounding, Neil? Good evening, Diane. Long time no speak. Okay, it is 2 Kings somewhere deep in there, isn't it? Somewhere. 2 Kings 15, I think. Yes, Neil, the batteries are charged, I think. And there's a spare one charging as well. All right, I don't sound too quiet. Okay, cool. Good evening, North Star or morning. Good evening, Chris Henry. Good evening, Sue Roberts. They are rolling in one after another. Bam, bam, bam on a Saturday night. The Three Arches is closed, but the Bible Hour is open. All the best people are here. We should just start. We don't need to wait 4 minutes. Let's just go. Chaos with the lighting system, but not as much chaos with the lights as I have had with sound. Now, let me just tell you. Yeah, it is quite confusing. I agree with you, Chris Henry. Timeline is good. You could keep it up in a separate window. So, sound, right? Windows decided a couple of days ago that it wanted to expire my Logitech software and release a new one. All right. So, I've been using the new one, but I've had no end of trouble since. And Windows settings is trying to override Logitech. Logitech lists 5 or 6 microphones when I've only got 2 and calls them all pretty much the same thing, so it's hard to know which one it's talking about. For some reason, it's all gone quite quiet. So yeah, all right. Yeah, TV on 30 out of 100. That's plenty loud enough. Let's hope we don't have another repeat of Battery Gate, because Neil is the admin and he'll string me up. He's the sound guy. Well, he's not actually the sound guy. Nick Hawkins is the sound guy. Nick is the general manager, overseer of all departments guy. Jack of all trades and master of all, it seems, Neil is. The eyes have gone. It's not a good start. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., we will be streaming a service, 6 p.m. British time, Welsh time. We're in the 3rd chapter of Ruth. So, if your local church isn't doing something at 6 p.m., just come over and visit. No comment, Neil. I was thinking it's quite good that there'll be a permanent record of these Bible hours always on YouTube. So if Bible hour ever can't happen again, we could just rewatch it all and always be together. I think Bible Hour series 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 could happen. We will begin reading the word of the Lord in 1 minute. But before that, MacDonald asked a question about Elijah and Elisha yesterday, and I promised him I'd answer. So now, because I reread the passage, I think I could answer a bit. So MacDonald asked yesterday, was it because Elijah complained that he was replaced by Elisha? And there and then I tried to look back a few chapters, but I couldn't find it. Anyway, I found it today, and it's in 1 Kings chapter 19. So Elisha is on a bit of a downer. He's probably a depressant. Most of the best theologians and no, most of the best pastors in the world have had depression, by the way. They just get it. They get people. They have that sensitive touch about them. Anyway, I think Elijah's one of those. But the New Testament speaks of Elijah really well. James does. The Lord Jesus gets him involved with one or two things later on. Spoiler. So I wouldn't want to say that it was in some sort of act of judgment that Elisha came along. But in 1 Kings 19, I think it's verses 9 to 10. Yeah. Like the Lord has answered him, and then he's taken him up to that great cave in Sinai, and he answered him again and encourages him again. And then Elijah gives the same answer again, like, I'm the only one left. And it seems from then on, when he's resigned to be a bit introspective and stuff, then the Lord's like, all right, okay, let's get Elisha involved. So judgment, no, but he did have quite a lot of opportunity to just trust the Lord, but he keeps saying, oh no, I'm the only one left. And then Elisha comes along with double the spirit and sees double the amount of power and miracles. But Elijah is one of the greatest saints ever. A man, he's called in James, just like you and me, whose prayers were righteous and effectual. And yep. And if you want great pastoral lessons, read John Newton's letter to the manically depressed hymn writer William Cooper. There's a book of John Newton's letters, and his pastoral letters to William Cooper are really great. They're tender. All right, here we go. It is 1 or 2. Where are we? 2 Kings, chapter 15, verse 23. Chaos in the ancient church. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Pekahiah, son of Menahem, began to rule over Israel in the 50th year of King Uzziah's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 2 years. But Pekahiah did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. Then Pekah, son of Ramaliah, the commander of Pekahiah's army, conspired against him. With 50 men from Gilead, Pekah assassinated the king, along with Argob and Ariah, in the citadel of the palace at Samaria. And Pekah reigned in his place. The rest of the events of Pekahiah's reign and everything he did are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. Pekah rules in Israel. Pekah, son of Remaliah, North Star. I have a new appreciation for him. For Elijah, probably. You're still talking about Elijah. There's a delay. Rather than Pekah, who was just assassinated a king, although he was an evil king. Pekah, son of Ramaliah, began to rule over Israel in the 52nd year of King Uzziah's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 20 years. Especially how he fled pagan gods. Yeah, I think you're still talking about Elijah and all stuff. But Pekah did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. During Pekah's reign, King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria attacked Israel again, and he captured the towns of Ijon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Janoah, Kadesh, and Hazor. He also conquered the regions of Gilead, Galilee, and all of Naphtali, and he took the people to Assyria as captains. Did I say captains? Captives. Then Hoshea, son of Elah, conspired against Pekah and assassinated him. He began to rule over Israel in the 20th year of Jotham, son of Uzziah. So the Assyrians have just swiped tons of church folk who possibly have walked away anyway from church life now. The rest of the events of Pekah's reign and everything he did are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. Jotham rules in Judah. Hold on a minute. I haven't plugged the wire in. We're on wireless here. Anything could happen. Everything could go wrong. Chris Henry, prob stupid question, but does the book of history, etc., exist? It did, but longer exist. It is gone, lost. Parts, though, one or two references, though, have been about the Chronicles, which we're going to read soon. But mostly, no, these are independent writings which have gone down the Swanee. Anyone with a metal detector might want to go and look, but it's made out of probably vellum or papyrus or something, so it might not work. Jotham, son of Uzziah, began to rule over Judah in the 2nd year of King Pekah's reign in Israel. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. His mother was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. Jotham did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight. He did everything his father Uzziah had done. But he did not destroy the pagan shrines, and the people still offered sacrifices and burned incense there. He rebuilt the upper gate of the temple of the Lord. The rest of the events of Jotham's reign in everything he did are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Judah. In those days, the Lord began to send King Rezin of Aram and King Pekah of Israel to attack Judah. When Jotham died, he was buried with his ancestors in the city of David, and his son Ahaz became the next king. Welcome on into the Bible Hour. If you want to know why we ask these questions of everything we read, it's because the Bible wants us to, but there are links down below which display that. 2 Kings 16, Ahaz rules in Judah. Ahaz, son of Jotham, began to rule over Judah in the 17th year of King Pekah's reign in Israel. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. He did not do what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord his God, as his ancestor David had done. Instead, he followed the example of the kings of Israel, even sacrificing his own son in the fire. Just pause there, because it is now following pagan kings, which the Lord warned them they would end up doing. They wanted their own human king. That's gone. Now it's tantamount to just following the example of the church kings. There's no difference anymore. In this way, he followed the detestable practices of the pagan nations that the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the pagan shrines and on the hills and under every green tree. Then King Rezin of Aram and King Pekah of Israel came up to attack Jerusalem. They besieged Ahaz, but could not conquer him. Like, church has slipped so much. Now, your church that you might attend, maybe at the moment it's on the right track. I must be stupid, but I always thought 1 and 2 Kings was the history of the kings of Judah, and I thought there was a reference to it somewhere in the Chronicles. Yeah, this is where it gets a bit tricky. So sometimes it is, but I think the main bulk of referencing that literature is to another piece as well, which has been lost. Which why I said there's a bit of crossover, because there is a reference to records which have been preserved and which we can read, but not always. The churches that we attend at the moment, like, they might be on the right track and quite Jesus-centered and that, like this church used to be. And what is stopping it from going completely just non-Christian, nominally Christian, and just a club? I think it's that in the present moment, people like us rise up and stand for Jesus and make church about Jesus. I just think if that had happened in the church, they wouldn't be here now. Especially that the leaders stand for what's right. Because isn't it interesting, all the times it's just said, oh, you're doing what Jeroboam did, and his sin was that he led the entire Israel to sin. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? Then King Rezin of Aram and King Pekah of Israel came up to attack Jerusalem. They besieged Ahaz, but could not conquer him. At the same time, the king of Edom recovered the town of Eleth for Edom. He drove out the people of Judah and sent Edomites to live there, as they do to this day. King Ahaz sent messengers to King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria with this message: I am your servant and your vassal. Come up and rescue me from the attacking armies of Aram and Israel. Then Ahaz took the silver and gold from the temple of the Lord and the palace treasury and sent it as a payment to the Assyrian king. So the king of Assyria attacked the Aramean capital of Damascus and led its population away as captives, resettling them in Kir. He also killed King Rezin. King Ahaz then went to Damascus to meet with King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria. North Star, it's frightening when churches go off track and you can no longer hear the shepherd's voice. Yeah, it is. I think that's what we're learning at the moment. King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet with the king Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria. While he was there, he took special note of the altar. Then he sent a model of the altar to Uriah the priest, along with its design in full detail. Uriah followed the king's instructions and built an altar just like it, and it was ready before the king returned from Damascus. When the king returned, he inspected the altar and made offerings on it. He presented a burnt offering and a grain offering. He poured out a liquid offering, and he sprinkled the blood of peace offerings on the altar. Then King Ahaz removed the old bronze altar from its place in front of the Lord's temple between the entrance and the new altar and placed it on the north side of the new altar. And Uriah, those that stand up get marginalized and called Pharisees, though. Oh, yeah. Or chopped in half, crucified upside down, stoned, burned alive. Yep. That's what happens from the Bible times on. Then King Ahaz removed all the bronze altar from its place in the front of the Lord's temple between the entrance and the new altar and placed it on the north side of the new altar. He told Uriah the priest, use the new altar for the morning sacrifices of burnt offering and the evening grain offering, the king's burnt offering and grain offering, and the burnt offerings of all the people, as well as their grain offerings and liquid offerings. Sprinkle the blood from all the burnt offerings and sacrifice on the new altar. The bronze altar will be for my personal use only. Uriah the priest did just as King Ahaz commanded him. Then the king removed the side panels and basins from the portable water carts. He also removed the great bronze basin called the sea from the backs of the bronze oxen and placed it on the stone pavement. In deference to the king of Assyria, he also removed the canopy that had been constructed inside the palace for use on the Sabbath day, as well as the king's outer entrance to the temple of the Lord. The rest of the events in King Ahaz's reign and everything he did are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Judah. When Ahaz died, he was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. Then his son Hezekiah became the next king. And things are about to go bad. Diane R. Is it that the kings who did evil were followers and copied the evil practices of their ancestors, but Jeroboam was worse because he actively led the people away from God? So definitely there's a biblical principle throughout that there's stricter judgment for church leaders who go astray and lead people away, let a noose be around their head. And multiple warnings in the epistles about church leaders being judged more strictly. But we had a king yesterday who it said had done more evil than any king before him, and that was Ahab, wasn't it? Or the day before yesterday. So I think the answer there is yes and no, but it does seem that Ahab did it worse, but maybe because Jeroboam was the first, he's like the reference point. It's like Adam. Adam fell. It's constantly referred to in the Bible, but I'm as guilty as Adam. Like I literally do what Adam does every single day and choose myself over the Lord. So yeah, that sort of thing, I think. Yeah, Ahab. Good question. Hoshea rules in Israel. Hoshea, son of Elah, began to rule over Israel in the 12th year of King Ahaz's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 9 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, but not to the same extent as the kings of Israel who ruled before him. King Shalmaneser of Assyria attacked King Hoshea, so Hoshea was forced to pay heavy tribute to Assyria. But Hoshea stopped paying the annual tribute and conspired against the king of Assyria by asking King So of Egypt to help him shake free of Assyria's power. When the king of Assyria discovered this treachery, he seized Hoshea and put him in prison. You remember that promise from the Lord? If you choose these types of kings, they will take all your money. There'll be a shackle around you and take all your money. You will not be free with these false leaders. Then the king of Assyria invaded the entire land, and for 3 years he besieged the city of Samaria. Finally, in the 9th year of King Hoshea's reign, Samaria fell, and the people of Israel were exiled to Assyria. Remember that. The northern kingdom has gone, 2 Kings 17. They were settled in colonies in Halah, along the banks of the Habor River in Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. This disaster came upon the people of Israel because they worshipped other gods. Now, I just want to say something there. In Romans, it says, Paul basically says, the word doulos, we are slaves to Christ. It's like, oh, hang on, I thought we were meant to be free. Now, well, yes and no. Jesus frees us to do what? Become slaves to him, which is freedom, because he's life. And here you see slavery to demonic gods. Like Egypt is the epitome of slavery in every sense. But now they're asking them to help them out. And I remember this illustration from a preacher some of you will have heard of called William Vernon Hyam. So William Vernon Hyam said, if anyone thinks they're free, and I hope this helps you in your spiritual disciplines and trusting Jesus to obey him, anyone can walk up to the piano and say, I am free to play this piano. And then they just bash out any old tune and it's horrible. Another person might say, I am free to conform myself and subject myself to the laws that the piano maker has set. So I'm free to become almost like a slave to the rules. And over time, they flourish within that captive freedom. And then they say, now I am free. And they walk up to the piano having the discipline of the master's law. And they play the most brilliant Mozart or Einaudi, Beethoven in the world. It's two views of freedom in the Bible. Both, you're enslaved to something. Bible makes it clear slavery to the rule of Jesus is life. They sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them safely out of Egypt and had rescued them from the power of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. They had followed the practices of the pagan nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of them, as well as the practices the king of Israel had introduced. The people of Israel had also secretly done many things that were not pleasing to the Lord their God. They built pagan shrines for themselves in all their towns, from the smallest outpost to the largest walled city. They set up sacred pillars and Asherah poles, Jonty, look away, at the top of every hill and under every green tree. They offered sacrifices on all the hilltops, just like the nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of them. So the people of Israel had done many evil things, arousing the Lord's anger. Yes, they worshipped idols, despite the Lord's specific and repeated warnings. Again and again. So that's the revealed will of the Lord there. Don't do these things. Again and again, the Lord had sent his prophets and seers to warn both Israel and Judah. Turn from all your evil ways, obey my commands and decrees, the entire law that I commanded your ancestors to obey and that I gave you through my servants, the prophets. But the Israelites would not listen. They were as stubborn as their ancestors who had refused to believe the Lord their God. They rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their ancestors, and they despised all his warnings. Remember, though, there is still a line of Judah in all this. They're not out for the count. They worshipped worthless idols, so they became worthless themselves. They followed the example of the nations around them, disobeying the Lord's command not to imitate them. They rejected all the commands of the Lord their God and made 2 calves from metal. They set up an Asherah pole and worshipped Baal and all the forces of heaven. They even sacrificed their own sons and daughters in the fire. They consulted fortune tellers and practiced sorcery and sold themselves to evil, arousing the Lord's anger. This has got to be one of the most damning chapters in the entire Bible, 2 Kings 17. Because the Lord was very angry with Israel, he swept them away from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah remained in the land. But even the people of Judah refused to obey the commands of the Lord their God, for they followed the evil practices that Israel had introduced. The Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel. He punished them by handing them over to their attackers until he banished Israel from his presence. For when the Lord tore Israel away from the kingdom of David, they chose Jeroboam, son of Nebat, as their king. But Jeroboam drew Israel away from following the Lord and made them commit a great sin. And the people of Israel persisted in all the evil ways of Jeroboam. They did not turn from these sins until the Lord finally swept them away from his presence, just as all his prophets had warned. So Israel was exiled from their land to Assyria, where they remain to this day. It is the halfway mark. Take 30 seconds to meditate on what just happened. Maybe eat something depressing just to get in the mood of it. We'll be back in 30 seconds. I was thinking, Bible Hour, right? Tomorrow is the 50th day, which is quite a big day. What's that in wedding anniversaries? I don't know. But 50 is quite a big one. You know, that's quite an achievement for people to have read 50 hours of the Bible. Some people don't do that in their life. Some preachers, Golden, thank you. Some preachers don't do that. Believe me. So I think, right, I challenge the Bible Hour to wear something. I thought of this earlier. Wear something to do with 50. I don't know what it is. 50 in some way. 1950, 50th Beatles album that you bought, 50-year birthday party hat that you bought in China or something. Something to do with 50. And we'll all bring it tomorrow as that event. In my head, that was really something good. But when I just said it now, I thought, that is a load of rubbish. But we'll do it. Tomorrow is 50 day. Thank you, Sue Roberts, for that. Now we all know tomorrow what you will be wearing. Yeesh. I'm not even going to repeat that because Jonty might be around. Parkhead Church, maybe post them on the Facebook page. Yes, do that. Send in something to do with 50s. But not Sue. Not Sue. You are banned from that on Facebook. Send it in all day tomorrow and we'll just be posting them out on social media. All right, okay, Sue, thanks. That's enough. That is enough information. But anyway, we digressed there for 3 minutes because we're on the eve of the big 50. So yeah, tomorrow is 50 day. Send it on in, Bible Hour gang. Although I know quite a lot of people watch this a day late. So one or two people are a couple of weeks behind it. So what are you going to do? Verse 24. The king of Assyria transported groups of people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, Sepharvaim, and resettled them in the towns of Samaria, replacing the people of Israel. They took possession of Samaria and lived in its towns. But since these foreign settlers did not worship the Lord when they first arrived, the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. Now we're seeing now the beginnings of why Samaria was particularly despised by the Southerners. And you know the woman in Samaria who says to Jesus, "You and me aren't supposed to be seen together in public." We're starting to see reasons. So bear that thread in mind with what happens with Samaria, Samaritans. So a message was sent to the king of Assyria. The people you have sent to live in the towns of Samaria do not know the religious customs of the God of the land. As he sent lions among them to destroy, he has sent, lions among them to destroy them because they have not worshipped him correctly. The king of Assyria then commanded, send one of the exiled priests back to Samaria. Let him live there and teach the new residents the religious customs of the God of their land. So one of the priests who had been exiled from Samaria returned to Bethel and taught the new residents how to worship the Lord. These various groups of foreigners also continued to worship their own gods In town after town where they lived, they placed their idols at the pagan shrines that the people of Samaria had built. Those from Babylon worshipped idols of their god, Succoth Benoth. Those from Cutha worshipped their god, Nergal. And those from Hamath worshipped Ashima. The Avites worshipped their gods, Nibhaz and Tartak. And the people of Sepharvaim even burned their own children as sacrifices to their gods, Adremelech and Anemelech. Do you get the vibe that Satan really hates children? And if he had his way, he would brutally murder every child that we know. It keeps coming up, doesn't it? When people give themselves over to demonic religions, they sacrifice children. And Jesus loves children. And Jesus says, bring the children to me. Sue Roberts, I couldn't take seriously a god called Nergal. Yeah, maybe Nibhaz. These new residents worshipped the Lord, but they also appointed from among themselves all sorts of people as priests to offer sacrifices at their places of worship. And though they worshipped the Lord, they continued to follow their own gods according to the religious customs of the nations from which they came. And this is still going on today. They continue to follow their former practices instead of truly worshipping the Lord and obeying the decrees, regulations, instructions, and commands he gave the descendants of Jacob, whose name he changed to Israel. This old helmet, what God do you believe in? Good question, this old helmet. North Star, describing life now. Okay, this old helmet. Any big questions, fire it over to the Park End Facebook group under Day 49's post, which has been put up today, and we'll wade into that tomorrow. But briefly, in this group, we're reading the Bible. It's actually the Protestant semblance of the Bible in this reading. And we worship the Trinitarian God, who is one God, but Father, Son, and Spirit. And he's most clearly revealed himself through his Son, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. I don't know if everybody who comes into Bible Hour worships this Lord, but that's the one that the Bible has its focus on. And a few of us here do worship them. Not a group, the Facebook page, the Facebook page. Welcome on in, this old helmet. We are in 2 Kings. Verse 35. So the Lord had made a covenant with the descendants of Jacob and commanded them. Hey, great stuff. Good. For the Lord had made a covenant with the descendants of Jacob and commanded them, do not worship any other gods or bow before them or serve them or offer sacrifices to them, but worship only the Lord who brought you out of Egypt with great strength and a powerful arm. Bow down to him alone and offer sacrifices only to that Trinitarian God, Father, Son, and Spirit. Be careful at all times to obey the decrees, regulations, instructions, and commands that he wrote for you. You must not worship other gods. Do not forget the covenant I made with you, and do not worship other gods. Do not forget the covenant I made with you, and do not worship other gods. You must worship only the Lord your God. He is the one who will rescue you from all your enemies. But the people would not listen and continued to follow their former practices. So while these new residents worshipped the Lord, they also worshipped their idols, and to this day their descendants do the same. We have made it to 2 Kings chapter 18. Can we have a good king, please? Hezekiah rules in Judah. Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, began to rule over Judah in the 3rd year of King Hoshea's reign in Israel. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother, Abijah, the daughter of was the daughter of Zechariah. He did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestor David had done. He removed the pagan shrines, smashed the sacred pillars, and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke up the bronze serpent that Moses had made because the people of Israel had been offering sacrifices to it. The bronze serpent was called Nehushtan. So that bronze serpent, which was used so mightily by Moses, and who Jesus actually refers to himself as the one lifted up in the wilderness to remove the poison of sin and death and decay, they actually ended up just defiling it and offering sacrifices to it. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before or after his time. He remained faithful to the Lord in everything, and he carefully obeyed all the commands that the Lord had given Moses. So the Lord was with him, and Hezekiah was successful in everything he did. He revolted against the king of Assyria and refused to pay him tribute. World Health Organization now use it. Nice. He also conquered the Philistines as far distant as Gaza and its territory, from their smallest outpost to their largest walled city. During the 4th year of Hezekiah's reign, which was the 7th year of King Hoshea's reign in Israel, King Shalmaneser of Assyria attacked the city of Samaria and began a siege against it. 3 years later, during the 6th year of Hezekiah's reign and the 9th year of King Hoshea's reign in Israel, Samaria fell. At the time, the king of Assyria exiled the Israelites to Assyria and placed them in colonies in Hala, along the banks of the Habor River, in Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes, for they refused to listen to the Lord their God and obey him. Instead, they violated his covenant, all the laws that Moses, the Lord's servant, had commanded them to obey. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, King Sennacherib of Assyria came to attack the fortified towns of Judah and conquered them. King Hezekiah sent this message to the king of Assyria at Lachish: I have done wrong. I will pay whatever tribute money you demand if you only will withdraw. The king of Assyria then demanded a settlement of more than 11 tons of silver and 1 ton of gold. To gather this amount, King Hezekiah used all the silver stored in the temple of the Lord and the palace treasury. Hezekiah even stripped the gold from the doors of the Lord's temple, and from the doorposts he had overlaid with gold, and he gave it to the Assyrian king. Nevertheless, the king of Assyria sent his commander-in-chief, his field commander, and his chief of staff from Lachish with a huge army to confront King Hezekiah in Jerusalem. The Assyrians took up a position beside the aqueduct that feeds water into the upper pool, near the road leading to the field where cloth is washed. They summoned King Hezekiah, but the king sent these officials to meet with them: Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator; Shebna, the court secretary; and Joah, son of Asaph, the royal historian. Then the Assyrian king's chief of staff told them to give this message to Hezekiah. This is what the great king of Assyria says. What are you trusting in that makes you so confident? Do you think that mere words can substitute for military skill and strength? Who are you counting on that you have rebelled against me? On Egypt? If you lean on Egypt, it will be like a reed that splinters beneath your weight and pierces your hand. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is completely unreliable. But perhaps you will say to me, we are trusting in the Lord our God. But isn't he the one who was insulted by Hezekiah? Didn't Hezekiah tear down his shrines and altars and make everyone in Judah and Jerusalem worship only at the altar here in Jerusalem? I'll tell you what, strike a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you can find that many men to ride on them. With your tiny army, how can you think of challenging even the weakest contingent of my master's troops, even with the help of Egypt's chariots and charioteers? What's more, do you think we have invaded your land without the Lord's direction? The Lord himself told us, attack this land and destroy it. Then Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, Shebna, and Joah said to the Assyrian chief of staff, please speak to us in Aramaic, for we understand it well. Don't speak in Hebrew, for the people on the wall will hear. But Sennacherib's chief of staff replied, do you think my master sent this message only to you and to your master? He wants all the people to hear it, for when we put this city under siege, they will suffer along with you. They will be so hungry and thirsty that they will eat their own dung and drink their own urine. Then the chief of staff stood and shouted in Hebrew to the people on the wall. Listen to this message from the great king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Don't let Hezekiah deceive you. He will never be able to rescue you from my power. Don't let him fool you into trusting in the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely rescue us. This city will never fall into the hands of the Assyrian king. Don't listen to Hezekiah. These are the terms of the king of Assyria that the king of Assyria is offering. Make peace with me. Open the gates and come out. Then each of you can continue eating from your own grapevine and fig tree and drinking from your own well. Then I will arrange to take you to another land like this one. Yeesh, someone hasn't read Moses. There's no land like this one, mate. A land of grain and new wine, bread and vineyards, olive groves and honey. Choose life instead of death. Don't listen to Hezekiah when he tries to mislead you by saying, the Lord will rescue us. Have the gods of any other nations ever saved their people from the king of Assyria? What happened to the gods of Hamath and Arpad? And what about the gods of Sepharvaim, Hena, and Iva? Did any god rescue Samaria from my power? It's powerful stuff, this speech, isn't it? What god of any nation has ever been able to save its power from my power? So what makes you think that the Lord can rescue Jerusalem from me? But the people were silent and did not utter a word, because Hezekiah had commanded them, do not answer them. Then Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, Shebna, the court secretary, and Joah, son of Asaph, the royal historian, went back to Hezekiah. They tore their clothes in despair, and they went in to see the king and told him what the Assyrian chief of staff had said. What do we do under such pressures just to give it all up and join people who say we're nothing? Well, let's see what Hezekiah does. I have an inkling I know. When Hezekiah heard their report, he tore his clothes and put on burlap and went into the temple of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, the palace administrator, Shebna, the court secretary, and the leading priests, all dressed in burlap, to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos. They told him, "This is what King Hezekiah says. Today is a day of trouble, insults, and disgrace. It is like when a child is ready to be born, but the mother has no strength to deliver the baby. But perhaps the Lord your God has heard the Assyrian chief of staff, sent by the king to defy the living God, and will punish him for his words. Oh, pray for those of us who are left." After King Hezekiah's officials delivered the king's message to Isaiah, the prophet replied, "Say to your master, this is what the Lord says. Do not be disturbed by this blasphemous speech against me from the Assyrian king's messengers. Listen, I myself will move against him, and the king will receive a message that he is needed at home. So he will return to his land where I will have him killed with a sword." Meanwhile, the Assyrian chief of staff left Jerusalem and went to consult the king of Assyria, who had left Lachish and was attacking Libnah. "Yea, a holy king! Yes!" Soon afterward, King Sennacherib received word that King Tirhakah of Ethiopia was leading an army to fight against him. Before leaving to meet the attack, he sent messengers back to Hezekiah in Jerusalem with this message. "This message is for King Hezekiah of Judah. Don't let your God, in whom you trust, deceive you with promises that Jerusalem will not be captured by the king of Assyria. You know perfectly well when the kings of Assyria have done wherever they You know perfectly well what the kings of Assyria have done wherever they have gone. They have completely destroyed everyone who stood in their way. Why should you be any different? Have the gods of other nations rescued them? Such nations as Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the people of Eden who were in Telassar? My predecessors destroyed them all. Haven't quite come across the angel of the Lord yet, though, have you? The second person of the Trinity, Jesus. What happened to the king of Hamath and the king of Arpad? What happened to the king of Sepharvaim, Henna, and Iva? After Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and read it, he went up to the Lord's temple and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed this prayer to the Lord. "O Lord, God of Israel, you are enthroned between the mighty cherubim. You alone are God of all the kingdoms on the earth. Bend down, O Lord, and listen. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. Listen to Sennacherib's words of defiance against the living God. It is true, Lord, that the kings of Assyria have destroyed all these nations, and they have thrown the gods of these nations into the fire and burned them. Good. But of course, the Assyrians could destroy them. They were not gods at all, only idols of wood and stone shaped by human hands. Now, O Lord our God, rescue us from his power. Then all the kingdoms of the earth will know that you alone, O Lord, are God. So Hezekiah sets an example then when church is on the back foot, outnumbered, being told to quit, give up. And that's prayer, praying to the living God. Prayer in the life of the church, so essential. Then Isaiah, son of Amos, sent this message to Hezekiah. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I have heard your prayer about King Sennacherib of Assyria, and the Lord has spoken this word against him. The virgin daughter of Zion despises you and laughs at you. The daughter of Jerusalem shakes her head in derision as you flee. Whom have you been defying and ridiculing? Against whom did you raise your voice? At whom did you look at with such haughty eyes? It was the Holy One of Israel. By your messengers you have defied the Lord. You have said, with my many chariots I have conquered the highest mountains, yes, the remotest peaks of Lebanon. I have cut down its tallest cedars and its finest cypress trees. I have reached its farthest corners and explored its deepest forests. I have dug wells in my many foreign lands and refreshed myself with their water, with the sole of my foot. I stopped all the rivers of Egypt. But have you not heard? I decided this long ago. Long ago I planned it, and now I am making it happen. I planned for you to crush the fortified cities into heaps of rubble. That is why their people have so little power and are frightened and confused. They are as weak as grass, as easily trampled as tender green shoots. They are like grass sprouting on a housetop, scorched before it can grow lush and tall. The depth of God's love, I think, refers to not just its depth, but its complexity. Because a few chapters ago, we saw his will that we are not to sin. And here we are seeing behind the curtains, he knew they were going to sin, and he's been placing things in place for his will to carry on. It's quite incredible stuff. 27. But I know you well, where you stay and where you come and go. I know the way you have raged against me, and because of your raging against me and your arrogance, which I have heard for myself, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth. I will make you return by the same road on which you came. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, here is the proof that what I say is true. This year you will eat only what grows up by itself. The next year you will eat what springs up from that. But in the third year you will plant crops and harvest them. You will tend vineyards and eat their fruit. And you who are left in Judah, who have escaped the ravages of the siege, will put roots down in your own soil and will grow up and flourish. For a remnant of my people will spread out from Jerusalem, a group of survivors from Mount Zion. The passionate commitment of the Lord of heaven's armies will make this happen. The passion of Jesus, the Lord of hosts. And this is what the Lord says about the king of Assyria. His armies will not enter Jerusalem. He will not even shoot an arrow at it. They will not march outside its gates with their shields, nor build banks of earth against its walls. The king will return to its own countries by the same road on which he came. He will not enter this city, says the Lord. For my own honor and for the sake of my servant David, I will defend this city and protect it. That night, the angel of the Lord went out to the Assyrian camp and killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. When the surviving Assyrians woke up the next morning, they found corpses everywhere. Then King Sennacherib of Assyria broke camp and returned to his own land. He went home to his capital of Nineveh. Remember that? And stayed there, because we've heard about Jonah the prophet in a couple of chapters ago. Now Nineveh is being mentioned. One day, while he was worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his sons Adremelech and Sherezer killed him with their swords. Good to name your boy after a god which demands child sacrifice. Then they escaped to the land of Ararat, and another son, Asarhaddon, became the next king of Assyria. What a belter! Jesus reigns. Jesus is Lord. Jesus is the angel, the messenger, the sent one from the Father himself. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. Destroy those evil gods. There must be more difficult names in Kings than Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and Game of Thrones all put together. Yeah, I know. Try being me, Nick Hawkins, and reading these names every single night. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Tomorrow is our 50th anniversary, starring Sue Roberts, and no pictures from her. At 6 p.m., we are looking at Ruth chapter 3. And at 9 p.m., we are back here, God willing. Glory!